And there were several stages in his life, and if you listen to the services, it kind of mapped out his life, different aspects of it. But a couple things that I want to focus on. First, when he was bishop in America, he had a vision for the church in America. It was a vision of unity. It was a vision in which all national, racial, ethnic boundaries were transcended, so that it was one Orthodox church that didn't have any kind of national or ethnic qualifier. It wasn't the Russian Orthodox Church, it wasn't the Greek Orthodox Church, it was the Orthodox Church. And this is very important. However, his vision also maintained within it ministries and outreach to all the various particular ethnic groups and languages and peoples who had come. When St. Tikhon arrived in San Francisco in 1896, there was already a large community there. They'd already been serving in English since 1870. They'd been preaching and teaching in English since the 1870s. So this was a community that was already a missionary community. Already there were Americans coming in. And when the first missionaries had gone to Alaska, their mission was to convert the Americans. Now at that time, the Americans that they encountered spoke Aleut and Yupik Eskimo and native Alaskan languages. But it even included English-speaking people and other people who, all the other peoples who lived in the Americas. And under St. Innocent, the diocese was moved, when St. Innocent was Metropolitan of Moscow, the diocese was moved to San Francisco. And this is what St. Tikhon inherited 25 years later. And he went all over the country. He went to little tiny towns on the plains of Colorado and the mountains of Washington State, in the mountains all over the West and all over the East. There was a large movement of unions into the Orthodox Church that started in the late 1880s. And by the time St. Tikhon got here and was bishop, that was going full swing. There were like 300 parishes that came into the Russian Orthodox mission. But one of the things, if you read the writings of the fathers who participated in that mission, it was always the mission. It wasn't a ministry to some kind of diaspora. It was the mission to the people who found themselves in America for whatever reason. Because as Orthodox Christians, we are never in diaspora. We cannot be in diaspora. Except perhaps we're in diaspora from the kingdom of heaven. Because our true citizenship is the kingdom of heaven. That's our true identity, our true ethnicity is to be Orthodox Christians and citizens of the kingdom of heaven. We may speak one or another language, we may have some X number of earthly connections, but who we are, first and foremost, is the body of Christ. And that is the very essence and the content of so much of the message that we need to be able to spread. Because there is a place for everyone in this church. Doesn't matter. Russian, Ukrainian, Serbian, Greek, Irish, German, Somalian, Chinese, Indonesian, you name it. From every corner of the world. And so, as we strive, as we look at St. Innocent, we need to strive to copy his missionary zeal, to spread the gospel to all of those people that we encounter, because there's space for everyone. And if we can do that, very quickly will this temple be outgrown. It's already pretty close. And thank God for that. So, Saint Tikhon's missionary vision was so important, and it inspired his ministry, and through it he inspired all of the people around him to go out and to do that ministry. He gave people the blessing and the authority and the responsibility to gather various ethnic communities. He sent Raphael Hawawini to gather the Syrian community. He sent Sebastian Dabovic to gather the Serbian community. And but you know what was interesting? There were very few Russians. It was the Russian Orthodox Church with a Russian Orthodox bishop, and some of the priests were Russian, but most of the people were Serbians, Greeks, Arabs, and so forth. And it wasn't really until after the First World War and after the Russian Revolution that there started to be many Russians in America. And so, when Saint Tikhon was here between 1896 and 1907, he wasn't coming to his own people in the sense of Russians. He was coming to his own people, the Orthodox people who spoke all different languages. Not only to gather them together, but to bring in as many as others who are attracted to the fullness of the integrity of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this was another thing that was so important in Saint Tikhon's ministry, and something he strove for until the very end, to preserve the fullness and the integrity of the gospel teachings. Saint Tikhon lived in a day very much like our own. 1917, he was elected to be Patriarch of Moscow, 101 years ago. And what was happening? The leftists were seizing power. The Bolsheviks, the Antifa of their day, were causing chaos. There were something like 20,000 government ministers before the revolution that had been assassinated. You know, from Tsar Alexander II down to local officials. There was all sorts of chaos and all sorts of godlessness being spread by those who hate God and by those who hate the church. Not too much different than today. They said they wanted to impose democracy, but the democracy, that was only a sham. It was only a ploy for power. And so it's no different today. They wanted to institute socialism and communism. You know, great lofty ideals from German Jewish atheist philosophers. But all it was a means of grabbing power. And grabbing power over other people's lives. And suppressing all that was meaningful. Suppressing the church. Suppressing everything that gave identity. Suppressing the family. Allowing divorce. Even the communists weren't into homosexuality. But allowing free love, everything that would obliterate a family identity. Our society has fallen even farther than the Bolsheviks in 1917. And so finally, once they had pushed the Tsar to abdicate, and then in 1918 murdered the royal family, what happened? St. Tikhon had already been elected patriarch as the country was falling apart. And yet he strove to maintain the fullness and the integrity of the apostolic tradition. At the same time as this was happening, there was a group of clergy who formed the Renovationist Church, who wanted to institute all of these politically correct reforms in the church. They wanted to make the church conform to the world. They wanted to make the church relevant to the new communist socialist ideals. And they shot and they tortured and they murdered everybody who stood in their way. St. Tikhon stood up against it. He maintained the integrity of the church. He was put in prison. He was beaten. He was put under house arrest. His Kilenik, his close, assistant, was shot on the steps going up to his house, to his apartment. And he never compromised. He never compromised the integrity of the church. He never compromised the integrity of the faith. We call him a confessor because he maintained that confession of the faith pure and in the fullness of its beauty to the point of death. Nobody knows how he died or why he died. Some think it was poison. Many think that it was poison. Another victim of the Bolsheviks. But a shining star. A shining star who laid the foundations for the endurance of the Russian Orthodox Church through the hideous times of persecution that were to follow. St. Tikhon took that same missionary zeal that he had in America and applied it to try and to understand and to figure out how to preserve the integrity of the life of the church in Russia under the most hideous persecution, which ultimately took 20 million lives. No wonder St. Tikhon is so much beloved. He's a saint for America. He's a saint for Russia. He's one of the defining personalities. His ministry, his archiepiscopal ministry in America, was defining of the future history of Orthodoxy in America. Very often in the Russian Church abroad, people think about the Russian Church abroad formed in 1924, and as a corporation, yes, it did. We're 23. But the foundations were already in America. When those refugees came to America from Russia, the church was already here. And that church was an integral part of the formation of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, outside of Russia. So, the history of St. Tikhon, St. Innocent, St. Herman, of all the missionaries in Alaska, and all of the missionary work that was done to establish Orthodoxy in America, whether it was with the Native Americans in Alaska, whether it was with the Carpatho-Russians in Pennsylvania and Minneapolis, whether it was with the Serbs and the Arabs and the Albanians and everyone else. That's our history. And it's a history with some profound profoundly influential holy people, such as Saint Tikhon. So, when we come into church, let us give thanks to God for the life, the ministry, the sufferings, the patience, and the endurance of Saint Tikhon, who endured to the end, so that the church in America might be planted solid, and that the church in Russia might be able to persevere, glorying in the cross of Christ, through whose prayers of Christ our God have mercy on us. Благословение Господне на вас, Его благодатью, человека любим, содали не присно и во веки веков. Glory to thee, O Christ, our God and our hope, glory to